if the movie was on fire and I could only save like 3 minutes, that to me embodies everything about what I wanted the movie to be in the spirit of the movie.
Scratch Entrepreneur. True stories of remarkable people who dropped everything to turn an idea into a healthy, profitable business. There are jobs you simply do. That's what most of us have, and there are creative passions that turn out to make you a few bucks, which very few are lucky enough to succeed at. One way to gauge the difference is the perception of children. If, as a child, you heard of an occupation and immediately felt you would rather eat raw spinach with no ranch dressing while sitting in the adult church service for 10 hours, this is likely a job you do. If, as a child, you imagined doing that exact thing every day, you dreamed about the details, imagined yourself in the daily routines, and presented it emphatically as the answer to the age-old question, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's likely a creative passion that might make you a few bucks. Occasionally, we meet someone who has succeeded at being that thing we dream of growing up to be. Our guest today is one of those people. Not only has Paul Shoulberg spent time with some of Hollywood's greatest stars, he's had the pleasure of watching them act out his words, his story, his screenplay. Even better, as a film director, he's been able to mold those actors into the vision of his story. Paul is becoming the grown-up version of what so many of us imagined as kids. A director and a storyteller who exorcises his angels and demons right there on the big screen. Paul Shoulberg shares his story with us today. We're glad you joined us.
Strangely enough, like my dad was always he wanted to be a writer and didn't have that, and it was something that sort of hung over him. He was great. The most amazing person, great at his job. He was a therapist and really not, but he had this passion to be a writer, and it just wasn't going to happen.
How did you know that as a kid? Like, how did you see it?
So I knew that he would try to he'd write poetry and be like, hey, what do you think of this? And it'd be like, but yeah. I didn't realize until he was on his deathbed and he told me this was something that really mattered to him, and it didn't work out. But looking back, it's really clear. Of course, he would read Ulysses with an accompanying book about trying to explain how to read Ulysses, and he was very academic about the whole thing. But he that was his approach, and he couldn't kind of free up the thing you need to be able to write creatively, and he just held writing in such high regard. Yeah. And so I always thought, well, that's a really cool way to do it. That's a cool way to live if you could pull that off. It wasn't something I pursued as a kid. I was really into sports. To my detriment, I think. I was a good athlete, but I wasn't a special athlete. And I remember just kind of all through junior high, really, that's all I cared about. Yeah. And as I started to realize, 15, 16, that I'm not a special athlete by any stretch. Yeah. I was kind of lost. Yeah. And I started to, I think it was my senior year of high school was when I think that was when I first started reading books. Yeah. I mean, I was fun. Literate. Yeah. But I actually started reading books and watching movies. And I kind of stopped going out as much and started kind of just spending time just delving into this, not like great books or great movies, just books and movies, just stories.
Started absorbing stories.
Yeah, like stuff that when I was 18, I thought that the best movie ever was Forrest Gump or Braveheart. I thought it was as deep as I got, but I loved them, and I got into it, and I started to realize that this was not necessarily, I didn't think I could write because that seemed like something that artists did. Yeah. And I was just some guy. Yeah. But I really got to the point where all I wanted to do was live in the books and live in the movies, and I did that for a few years, and I got deeper into. I started liking better authors, and got really into independent film, and that's when I started to really like. I just forced myself to start writing, to try it out. But yes, I feel like it's always. Definitely my dad. That's where that whole seed was planted for sure.
And just the fact, and since you didn't know at that period that he was even so into being a writer, it was really more how he lifted it up for you.
He would, when we would see TV shows, I remember watching Stand By Me as a kid, and it was narrated by a writer, the Richard Dreyfuss character. And I just remember watching that movie with my dad and really loving the movie, but hearing him react to that little bit of narration, especially at the end of the movie. I don't know how well you know that movie, but there's this great line at the very end of the movie. I'll butcher it, but it's just a very writerly moment.
Yeah.
And hearing him react to that, it just the way that some kids would see their dad reacting to Michael Jordan hitting a game-winning shot.
Right.
Which my dad loves sports and everything, but to hear how he would react to that kind of stuff really made it just planted in my head, and it never left. And I've always had this idea of what a writer is and just how cool that is. The reality of it is it's not we're the least cool people in the world, but it's kind of stuck. It definitely stuck in my head.
So for you, as you got older, into being a later teenager, did you at some point write something? What's the story of a point where you wrote a piece and it turned into something?
Okay, well, I went through a very brief 2-year phase when I graduated from maybe 3 years from high school, where I learned how to play guitar, and I was like, I'm gonna be a musician. Because I remember watching movies about musicians and thinking, that's awesome. I liked I was trying to study jazz, and I loved reading about Miles Davis and Thelonious Monk.
Yeah.
I didn't actually like jazz.
Yeah.
I liked the story, the backstory.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And so I would see movies like Bird with Forrest Whitaker about Charlie Parker, and thought, man, that's so cool. And I romanticized that whole thing. But really what it was the stories that I liked. I didn't realize that. And so I was trying to be a musician. I was trying to write some songs, and they were awful. Awful songs. And one day, as I was sort of I kind of was realizing I wasn't great at music. I was just some guy.
Yeah.
And I sat down and I wrote just kind of like a monologue from a character that was a failed musician. I don't know why. I sat down and just wrote it, and I read it back to a few friends, and they were like, that's actually pretty good. And I ended up handwriting it in my first screenplay from that monologue. And from that point on, I've been a screenwriter every day of my life since then. I've become a director in the last 5 years or so, but since I was 22, I have been actively working on a screenplay every day of my life.
That's super cool.
And I can't imagine not having that.
So you finally learned, after kind of all the way through that process, what you needed to learn was that you love to tell stories.
Yeah, I love to tell stories, and I have these worlds in my head that if I put on paper, I'm okay. And if not, I get really just upset with reality. I like to create my own realities.
Yeah.
But I can't live in them. I need to. The way I can process that is just through writing.
Yeah. So if you don't process it, you do end up living in it. Is that part of it?
Well,
and then you
if I don't,
sort of, or?
It's if there was a way for me to live in these created realities, I would probably have done that. I don't like some Black Mirror thing. But the reality of it is, if I don't write, when I'm not writing, something turns toxic in me. I'm not happy.
Yeah.
If I'm not writing, it's something I have to do.
Awesome.
And it's not like it sounds awesome, except for when you're not writing,
when you're not happy and you're not writing.
So when I would have full-time job and kids, right now I'm in this phase. I feel very lucky. Just at this current moment, I'm just doing writing or directing for a living.
Yeah.
And this could change in a matter of weeks. So but when I'm working full time with, we have kids, it gets hard to maintain that. I do, but it becomes a lot harder, and that's when I really need to have that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a double-edged sword kind of thing.
Yes, it is.
And right now, you're able to be doing it for a living, which is really probably what makes you the happiest.
Yes,
and so
it's great to be able to do the thing you're gonna do anyways as your job. That is the only dream. I have a ton of artistic aspirations and a ton of career goals, but if I'm making a living doing it, 95% of the dream has happened,
there.
and that's
right
the thing
there.
I have to keep reminding myself when I'm working on something that isn't my own thing.
Right.
It's just like, but I'm writing.
Still get to do it.
Yeah, it's such a hard field to crack. So to be able to do that, like I realize how lucky I am.
Yeah, well, when we come back, we're going to talk about one of the ways that you cracked into the field and a film that you put out last year, and one that I absolutely love, and I can't wait to dig in with you, and we'll do that when we come back.
All right.
All right, we're back with Paul Shoulberg, and Paul, you created a movie that came out recently called The Good Catholic, filmed here in Bloomington, Indiana. Had really four main characters. Zachary Spicer played Daniel, Ren Schmidt played Jane, Danny Glover played Victor, and finally John McGinley of Scrubs fame played the wonderful character Ollie. If you were describing that film to someone who hadn't seen it before, how would you do that?
You know, in a weird way, it's almost a workplace comedy. On one hand, because it is showing, just getting a look inside a world we don't see from a real human perspective. Priests and clergymen they're in movies a lot, but they're either villains or some sort of caricature or just some driving plot device. But we don't center around them very much. And I wanted to kind of show everyday life for non-everyday characters. And then ultimately I think the film is a drama, just showing this world, a look into a world we don't see very often.
And those three characters, there's three different priests that are characters in this story, and they all have such different personalities. I mean, where did those personalities come from for you?
Well, the two, like Danny Glover and John C. McGinley, are kind of polar opposites.
Yeah.
They're both based on priests I knew growing up.
Oh, okay. Cool.
And so they're very loosely based. I mean, I think a lot has changed, but I always thought it would be interesting to put those two people in a living situation.
Yeah.
Because in real life, those two would never live together. they have options. They wouldn't choose that. But for writing, the best thing you could do is put people who are opposites into a close quarters that they can't get out of, because that's how you get conflict, and that's what makes it work.
Yeah. I grew up, my dad's a Christian minister, so I grew up in the church, not the Catholic Church, but very much the Christian world. And one of the things that stuck out to me that Victor said, played by Danny Glover, when he was talking with Daniel about whether, I think Daniel was asking if Victor sees God and why he was a priest, and Victor said something like, it's not something I was called to. It's a choice I made as a person. It was so interesting to me as someone who'd come up hearing my parents always saying, we're called to do this.
Right.
And here the Danny Glover character says, hey, this is a choice that I made.
Yeah.
And maybe talk a little bit about the inspiration behind that particular conversation.
Yeah, so what Danny Glover's character is saying is you have to every day wake up and do the work and make a choice. You're making a commitment. You're not being inspired by God. Mm-hmm. You're serving. Mm-hmm. So you have to get up and do the work. Yeah. Don't this isn't magic. It's dedication. Mm-hmm. It's a choice. And you putting the responsibility on the individual to do this task is, to me, that's really any priest or, again, a writer or anyone else that tries to pretend like they are touched by some sort of divine thing that other people don't have access to, which is why they do what they do. It's just dishonest. Uh-huh. Like, the real people doing the real work know it's hard work and it's every day every minute you have to make that decision to do the work in any field to really serve what that is.
Yeah, I mean, if you're for artists, maybe it's tapping into creativity. And when you look at an artist from the outside or a writer from the outside, it's like, oh, this person must just bleed creativity, must just kind of fall out of their brain or whatever. Whereas you actually know as an artist that you're finding ways to connect with those creative moments and however it is that you've found to do it. And maybe what you're saying is that spirituality is somewhat similar. Yes, there's a spiritual connection that lots of folks in spiritual positions have, but you still have to get up in the morning and connect with it, and you still have to find ways to connect with it.
Yeah, and there are days where just as a human where you don't feel connected to other people, but you still have to look people in the eye and say hello and be friendly and be kind to people, even when you're not feeling connected, because you through that process you have a much better chance of actually having those moments of real spiritual connection. It's the same way that this happens with writers all the time. Like writers that say they have writer's block or they're not inspired or whatever it is. If they're not, the writers are always writing. Yeah. Some of it's good and some of it's not. Sometimes you're inspired, sometimes you're not. But like a good writer should have the craft to plow through days where they don't want to write. And if you're not doing that, you're not really a writer. When I hear people waiting for inspiration to write, they're not a writer. Yeah. And that's fine. But you're either doing it or you're not. Yeah. And you're a writer if you're writing, and you're not a writer if you're not, and that is it. Yeah. No matter how successful or unsuccessful you are. And it's the same with any other field where you just have to do it, and the inspiration comes and goes. Yeah. And when you put in all that work, when the inspiration comes, you can reach these really high levels. But it's the 99% of the time when you're not inspired. Yeah. That's when you're doing the work.
Yeah, and that's what Danny Glover's point is.
Yes,
you know, is that this is about being a priest. That's the story there.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So let's talk about Ollie a little bit. Ollie is a great character, a very funny character, and this fun-spirited priest. Maybe can you describe Ollie for us a little bit?
Yeah, he's a Franciscan and has a vow of poverty, and is this guy that really embodies what I think, me personally, the church should be and what it's supposed to be about, where it's about helping people and not being judgmental or pious, too, like overly pious, and just you're really there to serve humanity and just be good. Yeah. And he doesn't care about the social norms that you would throw on a priest. He doesn't, language. He'll say bad words. Doesn't matter. He will eat like donuts and get powdered donuts all over his robes. He doesn't care. Yeah. For him, it's about being there and being present. And so he, to me, really gets what I think religion can and should do, and doesn't really do very often. Yeah. But he really gets the spirit of serving people.
Well, and I think the movie, as you go through it, has so many elements of life and love, death and sadness, all kind of intertwined in a beautiful way. And Ollie is just like the hugest life point as well. He sort of represents to me that point in the movie that's like, oh, that's purity or something.
Yes. Yeah. Like just fully living in the moment and being present.
Yeah. So there's one point in the movie where both me and my wife Mackenzie, while we were watching, in the span of maybe a minute, maybe 2 minutes, were fully crying and then fully laughing immediately afterwards. And it's Ollie describing the definition of compassion. And I wondered if you could describe that scene to us a little bit.
Yeah, that scene in particular, when we cast the film, that scene was not in the film. And when I found out that John C. McGinley was going to do this role, because I initially thought we were going to get a comedian of some kind, like just a straight-up comedian to play the Ollie role, and we're going to give Danny Glover all the heavy lifting. Yeah. And when I saw that when we got John C. McGinley, who I knew could switch on a dime from drama to comedy, I told him I had this idea I wanted to write him a homily in there. Yeah. And he said, could it be about compassion? He has a special needs child, and it's a very big component of his life. compassion is very important to him, and he said, the real definition of compassion is to suffer with, and if you could somehow work that in, that would be great.
Yeah.
And so I was very inspired by how thoughtful he was about the whole thing, and I went off and I wrote it and sent it to him, and his response was, he texted me back just saying, "I'll fucking crush that," and we didn't need to talk about it anymore, really.
Yeah.
And that was the first thing he shot. Like, he showed up and came on set, and that was his first scene.
He crushed
and
it.
he really did, and he got it. He just got it, and
yeah,
that's a really good example of when you have an actor that trusts you as a writer and director, and an actor you can trust, and you could find a way to personalize the writing to them. Mm-hmm. That's when you really get those magic things, and that homily is, to me, if the movie was on fire, mm-hmm. and I could only save like 3 minutes, that to me embodies everything about what I wanted the movie to it's funny because it doesn't tie to the plot. It's kind of it's like its own thing.
Out there, yeah.
And it was written, I knew when I wrote it, I was like, I'm going to place it here in the script. I don't know where it's going to go in the cut. Mm-hmm. And it jumped around in the cut, and I was like, the movie changes after that.
Yeah.
And tonally, and that's where it ended up being the right thing. And I never write like that, where something is just kind of independent.
Yeah.
But strangely enough, I feel like having come after the entire script was written, that monologue sums up what I want the feel of the movie to be, and the spirit of the movie. And it's something that I, like, when I'm dead and gone, I will be very proud to have that in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it was perfectly placed, and it was a perfect scene, and he just killed it.
He really did. He's so good.
This movie, to me, has tons of layers, and that's what I love about it. It's only 4 characters, but there's just all these layers to all of them. But there's another layer to the movie that's not even a part of the movie, and that's your inspiration behind the film. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so my father... So it all started... I had a movie made in 2013 called Walter, mm-hmm. that I had... my father passed away right before that movie went into production. Mm-hmm. And it sort of marks, like, from that point, everything changed when my dad passed away. Yeah. And through the process of making Walter, I was the writer and I wasn't the director. And I just felt it was a very personal story, and I wasn't able to. When you're a screenwriter, you're kind of a half artist. Mm-hmm,
yeah.
And
because you don't get to take it from the paper to the film.
And I loved what they did with it, and I thought that everybody involved did a great job, but it wasn't mine anymore.
Absolutely.
And so I went through about a year after that process, trying to figure out what I am. Like, am I because I would write more stuff, but I was really struggling, and I decided just to sit down and write something really small. That's a story only I could tell, that I could direct and make it really small. So I decided to go to this family story I had, where my father was a priest and my mom was a nun, and they met in the church, fell in love, and I'm the third child.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It was something that's always been there, and I with my dad having passed away, and I was still really grieving.
Yeah.
I had trouble processing it. Partly because right after he died, the movie kind of went into production. It was just like, I never really let myself sit with it. Yes, yeah. And so I thought this might be the best way to actually start to process it, telling his story.
Yeah.
And I didn't tell their story because my mom's still alive, and I wanted to be able to take whatever liberties I needed to make the story work.
Right.
So I just took what I imagined him to be at that age. Mm-hmm. And I applied his philosophy to life all over the movie. Mm-hmm. But I really wanted to explore that story and kind of, in a way, spend more time getting to know my father. Strangely enough, I felt like I got to know him. Like, interviewing my mom about my dad, I've never done that, and I did for this film. I learned so much more, and started to get a clearer picture. And it just became this thing where I knew it's so hard to direct a movie. It's so hard, and I knew that, like, no matter what happened with it's worth it to tell this story. Whatever I had to go through, it'll be worth it to tell this story. And I kind of, that's sort of my approach now, learning from this. Writing is a thing I can do as a personal expression or serving somebody else's expression. I could do that from a craft standpoint for other people, and that could be a job. Directing, it has to be, it really has, it's just so hard that it's got to be life or death. Like, what do you want out in the world? Because you're going to give up a lot to get that there. So that whole process taught me, like, make whatever I'm going to write and direct has to matter as much as telling my dad's story did. I really learned that lesson through this.
So I want to dig a little bit more into some of the plots behind the inspiration, but I want to ask real quickly, just because you just mentioned it, what's so hard about directing?
Well, from just physically, you start pre-production, like hard pre-production, on the budgets of the films I use. You get like a month or 6 weeks beforehand. On bigger films, it's a lot longer. Yeah. But you really start the minute you never really know if you're funded until you've already done a ton of work. So you have to jump off a cliff psychologically and just say, I'm going to spend 3 months of my life prepping this thing that may or may not be funded. Yeah. And there's no, like, if you write a script, you have a script. Yeah. If it doesn't work out the way you thought, you still have a script. Yeah. If you prep to direct something and it doesn't happen, you have nothing. Right. You've got extensive shot lists for a thing that doesn't exist. So that part psychologically can wear on you. It's a roller coaster every day. Right. Oh, I think we got this guy, or this actor might join, or this investor is interested, but you don't know until very late in the game. So there's that. And also, it is just physically, you are spending so much time, the amount of prep. You have to staff. You go from being a guy that sits alone in a room and writes to somebody who is, you have to staff.
It's like managing a business.
It's managing it's popping up a business, like a $500,000 to $1 million business out of the blue. It's a hypothetical business for 3 months. Before the 3 months, you're trying to get it made for a year, 2 years. Some people take 10 years. Right. And then you suddenly have to staff this business out. Mm-hmm. You go into battle, and for a good Catholic, we only had 3 weeks, and it's around the clock every second. So during the 3 weeks of shooting, I think I probably lost about 10 pounds, and not like a good. Like, oh, I've been eating right. No, I think I ate M&Ms and I lost weight. So that's how much stress. I was just eating M&Ms. Yeah. And it really, we had a lot of people doing certain tasks for the first time. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like we had a really experienced crew, and then it was just me. I was surrounded, like, it was my first film, and I was more experienced than half the people on our crew, and just from having watched films being made. Right. Yeah. So it was just it just going through that experience, and then you go through editing, and then, which takes months and months. Then you start submitting to festivals, and that you wait and you wait and you wait and you wait.
And at that point, you still don't necessarily know if you've got something that other people are going to feel is good.
You really don't know, because your team, you really can't. You want people on your team that you can trust for feedback, for sure. Yeah. But once you've been involved, once you've been on set and you've been working on the process, you're not watching this movie as a normal person. Oh, right. Everyone has stuff riding on it. So I've got people in the world that I feel comfortable sending something to and being like, what am I looking at? Yeah. And I trust them. Yeah. But even they like movies that are great. I like movies that are great that financially certainly fail.
Right.
So, and I have to decide, I am at a point where I can't worry about financial success. I only, or even critical success. I can only worry about what movies, like who are the people that like the same kind of movies I like.
Yeah.
What do they think of this movie? And people will be honest.
Right.
And I have people that will be honest with me and say like, this doesn't work. And
so important. Yeah.
And so you get an idea of like, this is what the script for Good Catholic, for example, was really an even balance of comedy and drama. And in editing, what I started finding, the movie that was working was the mostly dramatic film with comedy in it.
Yeah.
And so once I realized what was really working for me, then I had to start cutting comedic scenes, just chopping them out. And people would be like, but we want more laughs and we want this. Yeah. So like everyone's got different opinions, but I was like, this movie is becoming this. Yeah. It doesn't matter what we intended it to be. Yeah. I got to cut to what's there.
Yeah.
And being able to, you have to kind of, at the end of the day, I had final cut on the film, which is rare, but when you get that, if you're a writer, director with final cut, at the end of the day, it's your gut.
Yeah.
You're putting your gut in the world, and you have to rely on that. And if you can't rely on that, you should not be doing this.
Yeah. Well, I thought you did a beautiful job with this film.
Well, thank you.
I thought that it came off in all the ways you described. And then when I understood the foundation, not only in the story of your parents, but then also the story of you losing your dad, I think a lot of that was in almost all the characters, and so that played, and then that made me even realize there's another layer here where, Paul's feelings at the moment of writing are parts of these characters' story.
My mom tells me repeatedly that when Daniel is talking about his dad, she's like, that's not your dad, that's you.
Yeah.
Like, that's you working out your stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I guess so. I didn't think about it, but yeah.
You didn't realize that until
No, not at all. And I was like, oh, this is actually, there's a lot of his dealing with his father having died is really me dealing with my father having died. But that's honestly, any good piece of work I've ever done, when you step back and you come back, you're not just showing your own self in there. You're showing yourself at that moment while you were writing. Yeah. That's the best. When you're trying to remember what it feels like, a certain thing, and trying to tap into it, it's still only going to work through the lens of what you're feeling in that moment. Yeah. And if you and I was grappling with the grief, but I had enough distance that I could. It wasn't just like, when you don't get enough distance, it's interesting, but it's
too harsh almost.
So I kind of really learned a lot in writing that about how, like, when you really want to write something that's really going to matter to you, like, kind of what you have to pull from. Yeah. And I before then, I had not figured that out. I had done it without thinking about it, and some things worked really well and some things didn't work. But I now know when it's something that's really going to be my thing, I got to pull from what's keeping me up at night while I'm writing it. Yeah. And then it's better for your own mental health too.
Yeah. All right. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about a new film that you're almost done putting together, and we'll talk about that, and then we'll finish up.
All right. Sounds good.
All right, we're back with Paul Shoulberg. Paul, we just talked about The Good Catholic, the last film that you put out. Let's talk a little bit about the film you're working on right now. Tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. It's a film called Miss Whitelight. It is about a woman who has this ability to communicate with people in a very in-depth way who are about to die. Mm-hmm. And her and her father run this business where she's hired out when people are hanging on and can't let go. There are people that are dying and families can't just make it work.
Right.
They bring her in to have a connection with these people and allows them to let go.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
After The Good Catholic, I was able to kind of process the grief of losing my father, but then I started to think about my own mortality. And so that's what was keeping me up, was just thinking about death and why, we see movies show death all the time. Very few want to really live in that world and really think about what death means and how it affects people that are still alive. And so I really wanted to jump into something very heavy, but put a character in there who, the twist on this character is she's phenomenal with these people, but she can't relate or communicate with the families at all. So like she's a disaster. Like the opening scene, I won't give anything away, but the opening scene, you see, like, you think you've got her figured out in the 1 minute in, and then there's like, in the first 5 minutes of the film, you realize how messed up this person really is. And I wanted to show someone that could connect in these most profound moments of your life, but wasn't able to connect on basic human levels any other time. How she channeled all of her emotions to these big things, but realizing that while life and death are the most important things, like, part of life is those day-to-day interactions, and if you're not getting that right, you're also missing the point. If you're not not dealing with your own mortality is, hiding from that and being afraid of that is a problem, but not living your life is just as much of a tragedy too.
So then in this film, obviously you're dealing with some dark stuff. Like, how do you balance it, or do you find ways to balance it?
There's a lot of humor in the film. And our lead, her name is Roberta Colindraz. She is a next level genius of an actor. We saw a ton of people for this role, and she really was the person that was able to embody this dark, messed up character and do it with humor and humanity and still have that edge. And to me, it's really her movie. I mean, it's called Miss White Light. She's a title character. And you could hang this whole thing. We have a great cast, great cast, but she is, it's her vehicle. And I'm so lucky to have her doing this. I just wanted, she will make you laugh and break your heart at the same time. And that's what you want.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you know it was her when you were casting?
Well, it's funny because we go through this process. You see a lot of people. You start to see the same monologue on tape with our casting director. A lot of normally, you go out to a lot of like these really, really well-known actors, and their work and everything. For this particular role, I wanted to see everybody. I wanted to see as many people as I could. I didn't want to find like this huge famous actor for their name to put in this. Like, I wanted just someone great.
Yeah.
And so our casting director sent me everybody she could. And I saw so many versions of it. And with Roberta specifically, it's hard to explain. You think you're looking for something, but she was the one I believed.
Yeah.
I didn't question the character when she did it.
Right.
I didn't question any of it. I was like, yeah, that's the person.
Yeah.
Not what, like, you in your head you picture a certain thing for a certain role, and she blew away every expectation I had, and all I knew was she was this character. And that, like, once you see that, that's what you're looking for on that side of casting. You want someone to just come in and solve your problems, and she solved all of them. And it was weird to just be like, well, yeah, we need someone that could do it like her. It's like, well, why not just use her? Because she's doing it perfectly.
Right, absolutely. That's cool. So this film is coming out when?
It's tough to say because we're going through the whole festival process, which can take up to a year before you even find out what festival you're going to premiere in.
Yeah.
So really, I could tell you once we know what festival we're in. I could probably it'll be once you premiere the festival, it's going to come out in 3 to 12 months from that premiere date.
Cool.
So it could be. I mean, it could be 2 years from now.
Yeah.
It could be 6 months. It's tough to say.
Wow.
Yeah.
We'll look for it for sure, and
All
I'm
right.
looking forward to watching it. What does Paul Shoulberg's world look like 5 years from now?
It's my hope is that I am able to have more movies out there. It's why I'm on this planet, is to write and direct these personal films. In order to make that happen, hopefully that world includes having a lot of good writing jobs.
Yeah.
So, I have a couple visions. There's the one where my family and I are all out in LA, and we're just, I'm able to support us, and everybody's able to. We're in a situation where everyone, my wife, my kids, everyone's able to pursue whatever they want to pursue out there,
Yeah.
and I'm able to provide that. The other version is we stay our home base here, and I kind of pop back and forth. But in all of these versions, I need to be getting writing work in order to make the dream happen. But I just want to keep making personal films. It's selfishly, it's just so fulfilling.
Yeah. Okay, so if people want to find you, how can they do so?
So you could see, if you want to see my movies, The Good Catholic's on Netflix, and Walter has been on Showtime for a couple years now, and I think it's still on there. So you could check those out there. I think there's probably always a way to find them on Amazon or iTunes or something.
Yeah.
I'm on Twitter. I've an army of 309 followers right now. So I don't, you might get lost in the mix. But I am pretty active on there.
Yeah.
It's just it's Paul Shoulberg at Twitter. I'm on Facebook. You don't want to find me on Facebook. It's just kid videos. So if you're not one of my family members, you don't need to find me on Facebook.
Cool. Well, Paul, it's been awesome to talk with you and just chat with you about your filmmaking and watch you grow as a filmmaker and be able to do the thing that you love and do it in a way that really shares such beautiful things with people. So thank you for joining us for a little bit on Scratch Entrepreneur.
Thank you for having me. This has been great.
Special thanks to Paul Shoulberg for taking the time to share his story with us today. This show was produced and edited by me, Jeremy Goodrich. The music is by my high school buddy, Mark Vinton. Mark and I lived together our second year in college. I painted my bedroom candy apple red, had a waterbed, and listened to a lot of the Rolling Stones on the radio. Mark was most well known for looking exactly like Jim Morrison. If you enjoyed this podcast, there's a couple of things we need you to do right now. First, subscribe to Scratch Entrepreneur on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you can hear future episodes as soon as we release them. While you're there, please give the show a review. We'd love to know what you liked, what you didn't, and what you want to hear next. Until the next time, we truly appreciate you listening.